Welcome to our reading with Martín Espada. My name is Neal Dwyer. I teach at the College of Southern Maryland, and we are so happy to welcome back Martín. I want to just mention briefly that the college sponsors many different literary programs, and novelist Wayne Carlin, who's joining us today, is going to be reading November 4th in the same format. And all you need to do is go to csmd.edu to register for that event, which is directly under Martín's registration link. We have another reading on December 2nd, which you will see when you get to that website. To register for each event, just go to the website. The format for this afternoon's program will be that Martín is going to read from and discuss poems from his new collection, Floaters. And then there'll be a short Q&A. Feel free to click on the Q&A tab at the bottom of your screen to send questions to us, and we will be monitoring them as Martín reads. Once Martín finishes, we will select a handful of questions to ask of Martín. So send questions. We are honored to welcome Martín Espada back to the College of Southern Maryland. Martín was born in Brooklyn. He has published more than 20 books as a poet, editor, essayist, and translator. His honors include an American Book Award, an Academy of American Poets Fellowship, the Penn Revson Fellowship, and a Guggenheim Fellowship. His collection of poems, The Republic of Poetry, was a finalist for the Pulitzer Prize. Last time he visited the College of Southern Maryland, he said, a writer has to have something to say. Martín has something to say. And what he has to say needs to be listened to and acted upon. I could say now more than ever before, but that would not be entirely true. Martín's work is timeless. It reaches back through hidden histories of oppression, racial injustice, and survival, revealing the need for all of us to turn away from ignorance, to let people's stories into our lives. His work reminds us of our shared humanity. And maybe we do need this message now more than ever. In his poem, Floaters, he writes, quote, he stood her in the weeds on the Texas side of the river, swore to return with her mother in hand. In the time it takes for a bird to jump from branch to branch, Valeria, his daughter, jumped into the river after her father. Can you, for just a second, pause to recreate this image in your mind? Experience the fear, the desperation, the sense of panic, a loved one's life hanging by a thread, and a man, and then suddenly seeing that thread snap right before your eyes. Can moments like this change the world? Of course they can. One family story, one unspeakable tragedy, one stark reminder of how connected and disconnected we are from one another, of the urgency, yes, in these troubled times, to act upon this awareness. And for those of you who are in the US citizens, vote. It is my pleasure to introduce to you Martín Espada.
Buenas tardes. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much, Neal, for that eloquent introduction. I would like to thank, in particular, Neal Dwyer and Wayne Carlin for making this reading possible at the College of Southern Maryland. As Neal mentioned, I visited many years before. I still have very positive memories of that experience. And here we are again in a very different world. What I'm going to be doing this afternoon is I'll be reading from my forthcoming collection. It's called Floaters, there it is. It'll be out with W.W. Norton in January of 2021. I'd like to start the reading this afternoon with a poem called Jumping Off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. Now, I am currently a professor at the University of Massachusetts Amherst, but in a past life, I worked as a lawyer. In fact, I was a tenant lawyer, a supervisor for a program called Su Clínica Legal. Su Clínica Legal was a legal services program for low-income Spanish-speaking tenants in a city called Chelsea. Not the Chelsea in New York, but this is Chelsea, Massachusetts, a tough little town right across the Tobin Bridge from Boston, a gateway city, a city of immigrants. It always has been. Those immigrants, in the days I practiced tenant law there, were coming from the Spanish-speaking Caribbean, Puerto Rico, and the Dominican Republic. They were also coming in increasing numbers from Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, Nicaragua, in the wake of the wars fomented, bought and paid for by the United States. And now, a generation later, we see more migrants coming from those countries across the southern border as a result of the destruction of their nations during those years and years and years of war. So all that made me contemplate the past in the light of the present. This is a poem based on my experiences as a tenant lawyer. I also make reference in the poem to the most notorious murder case in Boston history, the Chuck Stewart murder case, a man who shot his wife, claimed a black carjacker did it, and almost got away with it. Jumping off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I close my eyes and see him windmilling his arms as he plummets from the Mystic Tobin Bridge to prove me wrong, to show me he was good, to atone for sins like seeds in the lopsided apple of his heart, but mostly to escape from me in the back of his cab, a Puerto Rican lawyer in a suit and tie. I hated the 111 bus, sweltering in my suit and tie with the crowd in the aisle, waiting to hit a bump on the Mystic Tobin Bridge so my head would finally burst through the ceiling like a giraffe on a circus train. I hated the 111 bus after eviction day in Chelsea District Court, translating the landlords and judges into Spanish so that tenants knew they had to stuff their clothing into garbage bags and steal away again, away from the 40-watt squint that followed them everywhere, that followed me because I stood beside them in court. I would daydream in the humidity of the bus, a basketball hero flipping the balled up pages of the law into the wastebasket at the office as the legal aid lawyers chanted my name. I hated the 111 bus. I had to take a taxi cab that day. "What the hell you doing here?" said the driver of the cab to me in my suit and tie. "You got to be careful in this neighborhood. There's a lot of Jose's around here." The driver's great-grandfather staggered off a boat so his great-grandson could one day drive me across the Mystic Tobin Bridge, but there was no room in the taxi for chalk and a blackboard. He could hear the sawing of my breath as I leaned into his ear past the bulletproof barricade somehow missing and said, "I'm a Jose." I could see the 40-watt squint in his rearview mirror. "I'm Puerto Rican," I said. It was exactly 5 p.m., and we were stuck in traffic in a taxi on the Mystic Tobin Bridge. The driver stammered his own West Side story without the ballet, how a Puerto Rican gang stole his cousin's wallet years ago. "You think I'm going to rob you?" I said in my suit and tie, close enough now to tickle his ear with the mouth of a revolver. I could hear the sawing of his breath. He still wanted to know what I was doing there. "I'm a lawyer. I go to court with all the Jose's," I said. Stalled traffic steamed around us, the breath of cattle in the winter air. "Where are you going for the holidays?" the driver said. I thought about Christmas Eve in court, eviction orders flying from the judge's bench when tenants without legal aid lawyers or children old enough to translate the English of the summons did not answer to their names. Every year, the legal aid lawyers told the joke about the Christmas defense. "Your Honor, it's Christmas." I said to the driver, I will be spending Christmas right here with my fellow Jose's. The driver shouted, "What do you want me to do? Get out of this cab and jump off the bridge?" We both knew what he meant. We both knew about Chuck Stewart, the last man to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. Everybody knew how Chuck drove his wife to Mission Hill after birthing classes, the flash and pop in the dark when he shot her in the head and himself in the belly. Everybody knew how he conjured a black carjacker on the crackling call to 911, the way the Mercury Theater on the air conjured Martians in New Jersey on the radio half a century before. Everybody knew how 100 cops pounded on door after door in the projects of Mission Hill, locking a black man in a cage for the world to see, like the last of his tribe on exhibit at the World's Fair. Everybody knew how Chuck would have escaped cashing the insurance check to drive away with a new Nissan, but for his brother's confession, the accomplice throwing the Gucci bag with makeup, the wedding rings, and the gun off the dizzy bridge in Revere. Everybody knew how Chuck parked his new car on the lower deck, left a note, and launched himself deep into the black water, how the cops hauled his body from the river by lunchtime when I walked into the office to tell the secretary Chuck Stewart just jumped off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. I said nothing to the driver. I almost nodded yes in the rearview mirror. I confess, for a flash, I wanted him to jump. The driver, the cops, the landlords, the judges, all wanted us to jump off the Mystic Tobin Bridge. All wanted us to sprout gills like movie monsters so we could paddle underwater back to the islands, down into the weeds and mud at the bottom, past the fish plucked rib cages of the dead, the rusty revolvers of 1,000 crimes unsolved, the wedding rings of marriages gone bad, to we washed up on shore in a tangle of seaweed, gasping for air. Last night, still more landed here, clothing stuffed in garbage bags to flee the god of hurricanes flinging their houses into the sky, or the god of hunger slipping his knife between the ribs, not a dark tide like the tide of the Mystic River, but builders of bridges. You can walk across the bridges they build, or you can jump. Well, here I am reading to you in the dark. I sincerely hope everybody out there can hear me and see me. And if there's any problem with my transmission, I'm sure my hosts will let me know. This next poem also has to do with immigrants and immigration. And in particular, it begins with a photograph. It's a photograph that went viral a year ago last summer. Two Salvadoran migrants, father and daughter. It came to be known as Oscar and Valeria. They drowned crossing the Rio Grande. And this photograph, taken by a Mexican journalist, Julia Leduc, went viral. Everybody saw it. It was on the front page of the New York Times, Boston Globe. And it generated outrage. It generated grief. It also generated trutherism, as it turns out, skepticism from the right. And in particular, from something called the I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook group. And so this poem is a response both to the photograph and to that group and one particular anonymous post on their Facebook page. The poem is the title poem of my collection. It's called Floaters. This is a term used by certain members of the Border Patrol to describe those migrants who have drowned crossing over. Floaters. Epigraph. Okay, I'm going to go ahead and ask. Have y'all ever seen floaters this clean? I'm not trying to be an ass, but I have never seen floaters like this. Could this be another edited photo? We've all seen the Dems and liberal parties do some pretty sick things. Anonymous post, I'm 1015, Border Patrol Facebook group. Like a beer bottle thrown into the river by a boy too drunk to cry. Like the shard of a styrofoam cup drained of coffee, brown as the river. Like the plank of a fishing boat broken in half by the river, the dead float. And the dead have a name. Floaters, say the men of the Border Patrol, keeping watch all night by the river, hearts pumping coffee as they say the word floaters, soft as a bubble, hard as a shoe, as it nudges the body to see if it breathes, to see if it moans, to see if it sits up and speaks. And the dead have names. A feast day parade of names, names that dress all in red, names that twirl skirts, names that blow whistles, names that shake rattles, names that sing in praise of the saints. Say Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. See how they rise off the tongue. The calling of bird to bird somewhere in the trees above our heads, trilling in the dark heart of the leaves. Say what we know of them now they are dead. Oscar sapped dough for pizza with oven, blistered fingers. Daughter Valeria sang, banging a toy guitar. He slipped free of the apron he wore in the blast of the oven, sold the motorcycle he would kick till it sputtered to life, counted off pesos for the journey across the river, and the last of his 25 years, and the last of her 23 months. There is another name that beats its wings in the heart of the trees. Say, Tanya, Vanessa, Avalos, Oscar's wife, and Valeria's mother, the witness, stumbling along the river. Now their names rise off her tongue. Say, Oscar y Valeria. He swam from Matamoros across to Brownsville. The girl slung around his neck, stood her in the weeds on the Texas side of the river, swore to return with her mother in hand, turning his back as fathers do, who later say, I turned around and she was gone. In the time it takes for a bird to hop from branch to branch, Valeria jumped in the river after her father. Maybe he called out her name as he swept her up from the river. Maybe the river drowned out his voice as the water swept them away. Tanya called out the names of the saints, but the saints drowsed in the stupor of birds in the dark, their cages covered with blankets. The men on patrol would never hear their pleas for asylum, watching for floaters, hearts pumping coffee all night on the Texas side of the river. No one, they say, had ever seen floaters this clean. Oscar's black shirt yanked up to the armpits, Valeria's arms slung around her father's neck, even after the light left her eyes, both face down in the weeds, back on the Mexican side of the river. Another edited photo. See how her head disappears in his shirt, the waterlogged diaper bunched in her pants, the blue of the blue cans. The radio warned us about the crisis actors we see at one school shooting after another. The man called Oscar will breathe, sit up, speak, tug the black shirt over his head, shower off the mud, and shake hands with the photographer. Yet, the floaters did not float down the Rio Grande like Olympians showing off the backstroke, nor did their souls float up to Dallas, land of rumored jobs and a president shot in the head as he waved from his motorcade. No bubbles rose from their breath in the mud, light as the iridescent circles of soap that would fascinate a 2-year-old. And the dead still have names. Names that sing in praise of the saints, names that flower in blossoms of white, a cortege of names dressed all in black, trailing the coffins to the cemetery. Carve their names in headlines and gravestones they would never know in the kitchens of this cacophonous world. Enter their names in the book of names. Say Oscar Alberto Martinez Ramirez. Say Angie Valeria Martinez Avalos. Bury them in a corner of the cemetery named for the sainted archbishop of the poor, shot in the heart saying mass, bullets bought by the taxes I paid when I worked as a bouncer and fractured my hand 40 years ago, and bumper stickers read, El Salvador is Spanish for Vietnam. When the last bubble of breath escapes the body, may the men who speak of floaters, who have never seen floaters this clean, float through the clouds to the heavens, where they paddle the air as they wait for the saint who flips through the keys on his ring like a drowsy janitor till he fingers the key that turns the lock and shuts the gate on their babble-tongued faces, and they plunge back to earth, a shower of hailstones pelting the river, the Mexican side of the river. And let us not forget that at the same time, the Trump administration was demonizing immigrants like Oscar y Valeria. The same administration was also demonizing Muslims, the Muslim travel ban, and other forms of castigation and persecution. Even now, with Trump's attacks on Representative Omar, this kind of thing continues. And that brings me to my next poem. It's a poem for a friend of mine. His name is Mazen Nous. He's actually from Lebanon, and he is a professor in the Department of English at UMass Amherst, one of my colleagues. And as I said, a good friend. When the COVID-19 crisis began in this country, Mazen looked at me and said, and I quote, this country is about to be exposed for the third world nation it really is. And he said that, of course, using the phrase third world with great irony, but he turned out to be absolutely right in terms of the way this nation has been exposed for what it really is by COVID-19. And more recently, Mazen has been telling me about the signs he sees in this country of possibly civil war, or at the very least, great civil unrest. He's been right about everything all along, so I'm listening very closely, and that's why I wrote this poem for him too. It's called "Mazen Sleeps with His Foot on the Floor," for Mazen Nous. Mazen sleeps with his foot on the floor, trailing off the bed. He does not dream of dancing in Beirut. He does not hear his mother's ode hanging on the wall, belly round like a pear or fig or teardrop, strings cascading the ancient music. Whenever the rockets and the bombs shook the house, Mazen and his brother would jump from bed and sprint to the basement. The first step could keep the boys one step ahead of the ceilings and walls collapsing in dusty clouds behind them. Mazen would sleep with his foot on the floor. So he slept for 15 years in the roaring music of Beirut. I remember the air raid drills of my boyhood. The bald Russians would bomb us. The bearded Cubans would bomb us. We stood in the hallways at school, two lines facing the walls, because the bombs would fall between us in the middle of the hallway. The teachers told us to be silent, and we were silent, except for the boy who chattered at me until the music teacher, who loved operettas and forced us to listen, smacked the boy into the wall. He was the only casualty. The civil war in Lebanon is gone, and Mazen gone from Lebanon. Another teacher walking his dog on campus, navigating between the chain link fences with their cranes and boarded buildings, signs everywhere in red, warning, danger. At the airport in Boston, Mazen's skin will glow as if saying danger, and the wands will pass over his body, scrutinized by agents who would rather scan his mind for the clouds of bombs and rockets he conspires to drop on them. Mazen still sleeps with his foot on the floor. He knows what we only think we know. The Civil War, gone, but not gone. How the first step can save us when the walls dissolve like baking powder, even as we block out the rumbling, staring, hypnotized by the icy pond of the screen. So, there's some prophecy for you. In such times, in times of hate, we need poems of love. And I will now read two such poems for my wife, Lauren Marie Schmidt, who is a poet, a fiction writer, and a high school teacher. This first poem is an aubade. An aubade is a French verse form, and it's based on the idea of lovers parting at dawn. And boy, did we ever in this situation. And I dedicate this this afternoon not only to Lauren, but to all the teachers out there doing the hard work in these hard times. Abad with concussion, epigraph. Poverty is black ice, Naomi Ajala. You leave me sleeping in the dark. You kiss me, and I stir. Fingers in your hair, eyes open, unseeing. You leave me asleep every morning, commuting to the school in the city at sunrise. The landlord's driveway, a muddy creek, ices over hard after the freezing rain clatters all night. Your feet fly up, your head slamming the ground, an eclipse of the sun flooding your eyes. You sleep under the car. No one knows how long you sleep. You awake with 100 ice picks stabbing your eardrums. You awake, coat and hair soaked, and somehow drive to school. You remember to turn left at the Smith & Wesson factory. The other teachers lead you by the elbow to Mercy Hospital, where you pause when the nurse asks your name, where you claim your pain level is a 4, and they slide you into the white coffin of an MRI machine. You hold your breath. They film your brain. Concussion, the word we use for the boxer plunging face first to the canvas after the uppercut blindsided him, not the teacher commuting to school at sunrise in a Subaru Crosstrek. Yet you would drive, ears hammering as they hammer in the purgatory of the MRI. A week before, Isabella came to you in the classroom and said, "Miss, I cannot sleep. 3 days I cannot sleep." Her boyfriend called at 2 a.m. and she did not pick up. At 3 a.m., a single shot to the head put him to sleep, and he will sleep forever. His body hidden beneath a car in a parking lot on Maple Street. The cops, the television cameras, the neighbors all gathering at the yellow tape carnival of his corpse. You said to Isabella, "Take this journal, write it down. You don't have to show me. You don't have to show anyone." On the cover of the journal you bought at the drugstore was the word dream. Isabella sat there in your classroom at your desk, pencil waving in furious circles. By lunchtime, as her friends slapped each other, Isabella slept, head on the desk, face pressed against the pages of the journal. This is why I watch you sleep at 3 a.m. when the sleeping pills fail to quell the strike meeting in my brain. This is why I say to you when you kiss me in my sleep, don't go, don't go. You have to go. And here's another love poem. This one's a bit different. In my wanderings throughout the world, I paused for a year to attend the University of Maryland in College Park, where I became aware of something called a terrapin. And of course, a terrapin, as you well know, at the College of Southern Maryland, is a turtle common to the Chesapeake Bay. It is also the mascot of the University of Maryland. And somewhere still, I may have a T-shirt with a terrapin on it. And that began, I believe, my fascination with turtles and tortoises. So not for nothing, I wrote this next poem, which is in the voice of a Galapagos tortoise, but not just any Galapagos tortoise, Lonesome George. Some of you might remember him. He was the last Galapagos tortoise of Pinta Island. And this is therefore a persona poem. All the facts in this poem, by the way, are absolutely true and verifiable. So before you think I've gone off the deep end, I want you to remember that. This is a love song of the Galapagos tortoise. I am Lonesome George, the last Galapagos tortoise of Pinta Island. I see Darwin's hairy face on t-shirts and hats, backpacks and mugs. I see the statues. I can read the history books if someone turns the pages. I remember Darwin. I was there the day he landed in the ship named for a dog with floppy ears. He tried to lift me up and strained his groin. He climbed on my saddleback shell and tried to ride me, giggling like a boy on a birthday pony. He slipped off and rolled over in the surf, spitting sand. He watched me plod around in search of cactus to crunch, timing me with a pocket watch. He yelled in my ear to see if I was deaf, and I hissed in his face. He invited my tortoise brothers and sisters to board the Beagle. The crew hauled them up the gangplank as guests of honor. Darwin noted in his journal, young tortoises make excellent soup. Like the pirates and the whalers, the naturalists licked their spoons, soup in their beards, toasting the voyage with glasses of our urine. I am Lonesome George. I crane my leathery neck and hiss at everyone. I tuck my head inside my shell. You call and call my name till I peek out. I am a creature of the tropics who curses the icebergs of December. You dress me up in cardigans, sweaters, and wool scarves for winter. I groan about my gut, intimidating the curious with a drum roll of flatulence. You feed me the cactus of Pinta Island and pizza from the Jersey Shore. I am afraid of the toaster and dream of Darwin's beard caught in its coils. You are afraid of nothing as you make waffles jump from the glowing machine. I plod down the road as cars honk behind me, seafarers hungry for soup. You let me steer the car, even though the world is blurry, and you yell in my ear when the other cars cruise like pirate ships through stop signs. I will hiss at the next TV reporter who calls me Lonesome George. This world teems with pirates, whalers, and naturalists on parade, waving their spoons in the air, craving the delicacy of buttery tortoise flesh. But now I crane my neck to croak the love song of the Galapagos tortoise for you, and you swear I am your Frank Sinatra, I am your Sam Cooke, I sing better than Darwin. And no, I don't know where that came from. At times like this, we need love poems. At times like this, we need the poets. And the next two poems I will read are tributes to two poets um, who should be honored. Two poets um, who have loved me and who I have loved. Um, this first poem is for my dear friend Paul Mariani. Uh, Paul Mariani, for those of you who may not be familiar with the name, is indeed a poet. He's also a biographer of poets. And if you want to read the biography of William Carlos Williams, you turn to his book on Williams, for example. But he's written many others too, Hart Crane, Wallace Stevens, Robert Lowell. Paul is a professor emeritus from Boston College. Before that, he taught for many years at the University of Massachusetts in Amherst. He was there when I arrived in 1993. After all my years as a tenant lawyer, I didn't know what to do with myself in those hallways. And Paul was a one-man welcome wagon. We almost lost Paul a few years ago. And at the time, after he recovered, I wrote this poem for him. So at the end of the day, it's a poem in tribute to a poet. It's also a poem about mortality and how we face it together in these times. The poem takes its title from one of Paul's poems. It's called Be There When They Swarm Me, for Paul Mariani. You were once the boy of the big shoulders, hauling cartons of Campbell's soup at the A&P in 1959, yearning to brain the boss with a wrench. You were the poet of the great handshake and all the stories, squeezing my arm to tell me about Hart Crane, who leapt from a ship to drown at sea. Did he struggle to regain the surface, suddenly sobered by what he'd done? I wandered lonely as a Puerto Rican in an English department, and you found me in the hallway, calling me brother, as my own brother never would, calling me poet, as if that word had never drowned at sea. Once I was a boy with big shoulders too, plotting to shrink wrap the foreman's head the night of the layoffs. Not for you, the poet learning to smoke like a poet, bursting into tears at the sight of a mayonnaise jar because he loves the letter M, locking himself in the bathroom because his haiku is too short. Now, you tell tales of the hospital bed, your spine a wreck, your wobbling brain. Now, you write of scrubbing the deck when hornets sting and zoom into your eyes as one winged fiend multiplies by 20 and you win. But no, you cannot win. And so you pray, be there when they swarm me. I wear a leg brace up to the knee. The surgeons open my belly like curious children inspecting the pendulum of a grandfather clock. My insurance will not pay for my hearing aids. At the airport, they stop me because my beard is a suspect. And yet, I will be there when they swarm you. I will arm myself against the hornets with natural insecticides, the eucalyptus oil, the citronella, the spray of chrysanthemum flower tea, and then the baseball bat. Since I was born in Brooklyn, where people used baseball bats to smash burglars, cars, television screens, anything but baseballs. We will win, though we know we cannot win. You called me brother in the hallway as my brother never would. spoke the word poet like a benediction, and so we wait together for the next wave of winged demons. Be there when they swarm me. And here's another poem about a poet. This poet's name was Jack Agüeros. Jack Agüeros was a Puerto Rican poet, essayist, translator, um, community organizer, the director of El Museo del Barrio in East Harlem, at the time, the only Puerto Rican museum in the continental United States. He was a friend of my father's and would become a great friend of mine. And we used to go everywhere reading our poetry together. Jack died in 2014 from complications due to Alzheimer's disease. And like so many people, I didn't see it coming because he was always the sharpest guy in the room. And when the signs were first there, I had no idea what I was looking at. So this is a poem about the discovery, my discovery, and my regret. It's called flan, and you all know what that is. It's sort of custard. Flan for Jack Agüeros, 1934 to 2014. I was 8 when the blackout struck and the lights died all across the city like a massacre of fireflies. In the projects of Brooklyn, I steered myself to 14F, fingers spread against the cool tiles of the hallway, past the concrete and chicken wire terrace where I once burnt ants with a magnifying glass. Many years later, at the Chinese restaurant uptown, Jack said, "They got any flan here?" He was my first poet. I had seen the fireflies in his sonnets blink and float away. Fulano, the philosopher in the unemployment line. Blanco, the painter, painting in the madhouse. Monterosa, the dealer killed by shotgun in a bar on Avenue A. His mother, the seamstress in the quick needle of her sewing machine. Jack, the moving man, his hands sliced raw. He stacked his apartment with dictionaries in 3 languages. I knew the raconteur's grin with every tale. Raúl Julia is a friend of mine, a Puerto Rican playing Macbeth. He took 14 curtain calls on opening night. Maybe he would tell me now the flan was not Puerto Rican or Mexican or Spanish, but Chinese, invented by a trembling cook to satisfy the palate of an emperor in the Ming Dynasty. No flan, Jack, I said. This is a Chinese restaurant. 2 minutes later, he said, "They got any flan?" I showed him the dog-eared and fingerprinted menu. "No flan," I said. When the waiter unfurled his pad, Jack said to him, "You got flan?" He sang his song for an hour. The egg roll was not flan. The fried rice was not flan. The fortune cookie was not flan. "Can we get some flan?" He said. "God damn it, Jack," I said. The poets crowded into the bar, striding to the mic. Jack stood with poem in hand, read the title, tilted his head, and said it again. Studied the page as if the words shriveled up like ants burnt under a magnifying glass, then sat down. I witnessed the massacre of fireflies. A few of us clapped, not knowing what to do with our hands, staring at the sonneteer who lost all his quatrains and couplets in the denim jacket he left on the subway, the words of Fulano still waiting on the unemployment line. "The faster you spin, the stiller you look. There's something to learn in that." But what? After the diagnosis, I handed Jack a book of poems. He dangled the book upside down like a stiff mouse by the tail, something we would sniff behind the refrigerator. I wanted sonnets. Jack kept singing the chorus of a song. Get me to the church, get me to the church, get me to the church on time. At the end, I leaned over Jack's bed to read his own poem in his ear, but some words come home after the blackout, fingers crawling on the wall. I know what I should have said at the Chinese restaurant. Jack, let's get some flan. We should have braved the subway at rush hour, strap hangers rocking all the way to 14th Street and 8th Avenue to La Taza de Oro, gone now like Jack for rice and beans, squid in its own ink, café con leche y flan, Jack. A spoonful of flan for you. After all the years of sonnets and bread for me, the steam rising when your hands crack the crust at the table. And I will finish my reading with this poem, um, last poem in the collection. It's called Letter to My Father. My father, Francisco Luis Espada, was born in the mountain town of Utuado, Puerto Rico in 1930 and died in Pacifica, California in 2014. The hurricane that devastated Puerto Rico, Hurricane Maria, struck just a little bit more than 3 years ago. We just noted that grim anniversary. The devastation that left at least 3,000 people dead, thanks not only to Hurricane Maria, but another hurricane by the name of Trump. I began talking to my father about what I saw, especially because I kept seeing images of his hometown, of Utuado, on television or on my computer screen. Utuado, in particular, devastated, the epicenter of the hurricane, according to one journalist. Story after story coming out of this town that no one had ever heard of in this country before. I began to talk to my father to tell him what was happening in Utuado, as if he was still there. People talk to the dead all the time. It also happens that I have his ashes in a box on my bookshelf. And so I found myself talking to those ashes in a box about Hurricane Maria in Puerto Rico and so much more. I'll close with this poem again. It's called Letter to My Father, October 2017. You once said, my reward for this life will be 1,000 pounds of dirt shoveled in my face. You were wrong. You are 7 pounds of ashes in a box, a Puerto Rican flag wrapped around you, next to a red brick from the house in Utuado where you were born, all crammed together on my bookshelf. You taught me there is no God, no life after this life, so I know you are not watching me type this letter over my shoulder. When I was a boy, you were God. I watched from the 7th floor of the projects as you walked down into the street to stop a public execution. A big man caught a small man stealing his car, and everyone in Brooklyn heard the car alarm wail of the condemned, "He's killing me." At a word from you, the executioner's hand slipped from the hair of the thief. The kid was high, was all you said when you came back to us. When I was a boy and you were God, we flew to Puerto Rico. You said, my grandfather was the mayor of Utuado. His name was Buenaventura. That means good fortune. I believed in your grandfather's name. I heard the tree frogs chanting to each other all night. I saw a banana leaf and elephant palm sprouting from the mountain's belly. I gnawed the mango's pit, and the sweet yellow hair stuck between my teeth. I said to you, you came from another planet. How'd you do it? You said, every morning, just before I woke up, I saw the mountains. Every morning, I see the mountains. And Utuado, three sisters, all in their 70s, all bedridden, all Pentecostales, who only left the house for church, lay sleeping on mattresses spread across the floor when the hurricane gutted the mountain, the way a butcher slices open a dangled pig, and a rolling wall of mud buried them, leaving the fourth sister to stagger into the street, screaming like an unheeded prophet about the end of the world. In Utuado, a man had cultivated a garden of aguacate and carambola, feeding the avocado and star fruit to his nieces from New York, so the trees in his garden be headed all at once like the soldiers of a beaten army, and so hanged himself. And Utuado, a welder and a handyman, rigged a pulley with a shopping cart to ferry rice and beans across the river where the bridge collapsed, witnessed the cart swaying above so many hands that raised the sign that told the helicopters, Campamento Los Olvidados, Camp of the Forgotten. Los Olvidados wait 7 hours in line for a government meal of Skittles and Vienna sausage, or a tarp to cover the bones of a house with no roof as the fungus grows on their skin from sleeping on mattresses drenched with the spit of the hurricane. They drink the brown water, waiting for microscopic monsters in their bellies to visit, plagues upon them. A nurse says, these people are going to have an epidemic. These people are going to die. The president flips rolls of paper towels to a crowd at a church in Guaynabo, Zeus lobbing thunderbolts on the locked ward of his delusions. Down the block, cousin Ricardo, Bernice's boy, says that somebody stole his can of diesel. I heard somebody ask you once if Puerto Rico needed to be free, and you said, 3 pulgadas de sangre en la calle. 3 inches of blood in the street. Now, 3 inches of mud flow through the streets of Utuado, and troops patrol the town as if guarding the vein of copper in the ground, as if a shovel digging graves in the backyard might strike the ore below, as if La Brigada swinging machetes to clear the road might remember the last uprising. I know you are not God. I have the proof. 7 pounds of ashes in a box on my bookshelf. Gods do not die, and yet I want you to be God again. Stride from the crowd to seize the president's arm before another roll of paper towels sails away. Thunder Spanish obscenities in his face. Banish him to a roofless rainstorm in Utuado, so he unravels one soaked sheet after another till there is nothing left but his cardboard heart. I promised myself I would stop talking to you. White box of gray grit. You were deaf even before you died. Hear my promise now. I will take you to the mountains where houses lost like ships at sea rise blue and yellow from the mud. I will open my hands. I will scatter your ashes. In Utuado. Muchas gracias. Thank you very much.
And thank you, Martin. That's all I can say is thank you. It's an incredibly powerful book. And It's coming out in January.
Yes.
Right. Okay.
And of
And,
course, you can, I should point out, you can pre-order it now either through Norton or Amazon.
Okay. Yeah, there's a link on the CSM page that you all use to register for this event, where you click on it, you can pre-order right there. Okay, the Q&A. Martin, this one comes in from Wayne. What can a poet do for social justice that is more and different and maybe better than a lawyer?
Well, an excellent question, and one that forces me to engage both sides of my brain, you might say. They are both forms of advocacy. And certainly what a lawyer does, I don't want to diminish, especially a legal services lawyer doing what I did. I believe that they are fighting the good fight, as the saying goes, but so can poets. And what poets can do is different in the sense of being able to reach inside the heart and the mind with language that cannot possibly be summoned by a lawyer. There's a way in which what I try to do as a poet is to engage with that spirit, to engage with what is at the core of other people, to reach out in that way. And of course, I have no way of knowing when I put a poem into the world what kind of effect it will possibly have. Sometimes it comes back to me, people tell me, but when you're in the moment of creation or composition, you are sitting in the dark, just as I was when I was doing that reading a few minutes ago. But poets can do something with the language, simply put, that lawyers cannot do, either because lawyers don't have the training and the inclination, or because it is not part of the lawyer's task to do. I try to ground my poetry, my language in the senses, in the image, in a way such that I can put the reader or the listener on the spot, right there where I was, right there where somebody else was, standing at the edge of that river, and therefore make us think and feel differently than perhaps we have before.
Thank you. Delaney would like to know what is the significance of the floaters being clean? Why does that stand out so much?
That was as you know from hearing the poem, pulled verbatim from the anonymous post on this I'm 1015 Border Patrol Facebook page. And the idea was that the floaters, in quotes, were clean because, in fact, they were not actually dead. They hadn't actually drowned, according to this trutherism, according to this conspiracy theory. And we're now familiar, because we've been seeing and hearing it over and over again, right from the White House even, that the extreme right wing is very fond of all kinds of conspiracy theories. Just think about QAnon and what that represents. Well, this was just one more variation on that way of thinking, that this was some sort of, this photograph represented one more conspiracy. And the idea was that the bodies weren't muddy enough, they weren't dirty enough to actually be people who had drowned in that river. And of course, we know differently. We know what happened, and you can actually follow that story, because after the bodies were taken out of that river, they were taken back to El Salvador. There was a funeral, there was a burial. Those were real people, and the same holds true for every single person who has died trying to get into this country to seek a better life, just as so many millions have throughout the history of this country.
At a time when dehumanization seems to be the rule of the day. And the poems that you just read, reminding us of stories like that, people like that, the suffering that goes on, which sadly we don't have too much of. Just a very quick question, Martin. Sandra would like to know, Pete, the title of the last part of your reading that included, I Want You to Be God Again.
Yeah, that's a poem called Letter to My Father. And you can find that poem both in its written form and audio on the website of the Poetry Foundation. In fact, you can find a number of poems of mine on the website of the Poetry Foundation if you just look me up by name. And some of those poems actually appeared in what's called the Lilly Prize Portfolio, which I published in Poetry Magazine when I received the Ruth Lilly Poetry Prize in 2018. So, if you want to find more of the work that's included in this collection before the book comes out, you can certainly find it there at the website of the Poetry Foundation.
Thank you very much. This one, you had a book banned in what state was that?
That was Tucson, Arizona.
In Tucson. Could you say why? What problem did they have with your book?
Oh, they had a problem with a lot of books.
Yeah.
The context here is I had a book of essays and poems called Zapata's Disciple that was banned in Tucson, Arizona. And this takes us back a few years. The state of Arizona at that point was headed by a particularly extreme right-wing governor, and she and some of her Confederates got together to put together legislation that was basically targeting one program in the state of Arizona, and that was the very successful Mexican American Studies program in Tucson. And they managed to, according to their legislation, characterize this as illegal, characterize it as a form of hatred directed against a particular group, the group in this case being white people. And all that was happening in this program in Tucson, the Mexican American Studies program, was an actual accurate accounting of Mexican and Mexican American history in the southwestern United States. So my book was part of a curriculum. It was part of a long list of other books that, in fact, were banned. And I mean, literally, the state people from the state came in and removed those books from the classrooms and boxed them up and took them away to a warehouse as teachers and students looked on. There then began a campaign that consisted of raising awareness about what was happening in Arizona at the same time the case worked its way through the courts. And it took years. And ultimately, our side was vindicated because, in point of fact, it was unconstitutional for the state of Arizona to target this one Mexican American studies program in this discriminatory fashion. You can't pass one law to target one group of people. And that's exactly what they did. That was unconstitutional. But by the time that ruling was handed down, the damage had been done. And that program was gone, and the teachers had been dispersed, and it was something of a tragedy. However, there was all kinds of solidarity, all kinds of support for both the authors and the program itself. And I know that for a fact that courses sprang up everywhere. You adopting the actual curriculum that had been banned in Tucson, so the struggle went on, and there was some brilliant organizers who actually managed to do some very creative things to counteract what could happen in Arizona. There was a fellow named Tony Diaz um, who organized a campaign to bring books, those same banned books, back into Arizona and put them in clandestine libraries all over the place. You know, it was a, I was proud to be part of that resistance. And, you know, it's not the first time nor the last time that I've been banned. I think I was saying before we went on the air, I once got a bomb threat at a poetry reading, as a matter of fact, in Tucson, Arizona. I'll have to go back there
Yeah.
sometime soon.
Because the reason I brought that up, not only because of the bomb threat, but Jacob, to know if you've ever gotten any hate or backlash for your poems. Well, that's one example of it. A bomb threat is another example of it. But
Yeah, the short answer is yes.
yes.
You know, I did get that bomb threat in Tucson. That was quite an experience. You know, you know, somebody right at 7 o'clock when the reading was supposed to begin, and it was a benefit, as a matter
Wow.
of fact, for a border rights group. I got up to speak, and then somebody else's voice came out, and it was a loudspeaker over my shoulder saying that we have just received a bomb threat. Everyone, please evacuate. I never saw people move so fast in my life. And we got out in the parking lot, and there was a great deal of milling about. We didn't know what to do. The police sealed off the building, and they brought in bomb sniffing dogs. I didn't know Tucson had bomb sniffing dogs. And there we were in the dark. And so I actually did the reading that night under a street lamp.
Oh,
And, you know, I was surrounded by people who were standing in empty parking spaces or had gotten chairs from a nearby cafe that also was closed. And we were actually on the lead story on the 10 o'clock news. And that was one of those situations where censorship boomerangs. Most of the time, however, I have to say, censorship works. It's effective. And, you know, for a country that it prides itself on freedom of expression, there's an awful lot of censorship that goes on every single day. And we're not aware of it because it happens behind the scenes. It happens quietly, discreetly, and it works. It's effective. Um, you know, and that's one form of expressing hatred. There are others. You know, the title poem of this collection, Floaters, was attacked very directly not that long ago by a white nationalist website. But I guess they're intellectual white nationalists, so it's okay.
we'll take a few more. John would like to know, well, first, thanking you. And we've got expressions of thanks and just for sharing your gift with us. John, starts by thanking you for a great reading. How do you manage to balance message and craft so well? I.e. the way a poem works as a poem. Okay, there's that.
No, that's good. That's very good. The craft comes first. That's how I balance it. That the craft comes before the message. The message is necessary but not sufficient. If the poem doesn't work as a poem, the message, so to speak, does not get out. Or it doesn't get out as well as it should. It doesn't move people as well as it should. It doesn't have the potential to impact the world as it should. If the poem does not satisfy me in terms of craft, it will never see the light of day. So I think very carefully about the elements of craft in my work. I think first and foremost about the image, about the senses on paper. I think about the musicality of a poem, as you may have heard. I think about alliteration and assonance and delights like that. I think about the poem as poem, you know, and not that I'm interested in writing poetry for its own sake. I'm not interested in art for art's sake. That should be obvious to anyone who just heard the reading. But I do believe that there are too many bad political poems out there. I mean, there are bad poems on every subject. I don't think it's political poetry per se that lends itself to that kind of difficulty. But I mean, there are bad love poems by the score. There are bad poems about trees, and there are lots of bad poems about nothing, where the subject is nothing, where where the poet does not intend to communicate at all, and that to me is the most aggravating. But I try to do the due diligence when it comes to the craft of it. Absolutely.
Okay. So we'll finish up on this one, Martin. Do you feel as though, I mean, let's see, it's Nick who would like to know if you feel as though the polarization caused by politics in everyday life is inevitable.
If the polarization is inevitable,
That is caused by politics in everyday life, if it's inevitable. We are, as it were, stuck in a cycle of polar. We can see it today, further and further and further and further apart. But do you think that that's inevitable?
I don't believe that the point at which we have arrived was inevitable. I believe that the circumstances in which we find ourselves were very deliberately provoked, created to benefit the powerful. There's an old maxim, it goes back many, many years. Divide and rule. It must be understood that there's a powerful elite that controls what we call our democracy, and that we often are manipulated to act against our own best interests in order that that elite may prosper. And so the divisions that we see ourselves struggling with in the present day are divisions that actually are far from accidental. These are deliberately created divisions in order to keep natural allies and natural constituencies from getting together and truly creating the democracy that we all deserve, and which we believed was part of our daily life. You know, I've now been around long enough. I'm 63 years old, that I have seen many cycles politically. I have seen many divisions, and I remember, even though I was young, the way this country was divided over the Nixon administration, was divided over the war in Vietnam, as our friend Wayne Carlin, Vietnam veteran, could tell you. You know, those divisions were real, they were brutal. There's no denying that. But many people who were of a generation older than mine, who can remember with clarity what those days were like, point to what's happening now and say, never seen anything like it.
Oh,
You know, I remember asking that question of Donald Hall. You know, I saw Don a few times shortly before he died, and he was almost 90 years old. I said, Don, you remember Nixon? Do you remember Vietnam? He said, yep. I said, is this worse? He said, yep. You know, and Don didn't mince words. If you knew Don, you know that. We're looking at, and you know, Neal implied this at the beginning of the presentation when he urged people to vote. We are looking at as a turning point in our history as a nation, nothing less. We're looking at, and it's not hyperbole to say it. We're looking at a despot, a demagogue, an authoritarian, and one who has actively promoted the worst impulses in terms of racism, to gather as much power as he can to himself and to those he represents in this economy, in this society. Let's not forget that Trump represents a certain elite. He's not doing this only for his own sake. And we are looking at the very foundations of our democratic system being shaken and split and cracked to the core. And unless we rally together, unless we try to heal some of those divisions, unless we get out and do what is necessary to save this democratic machinery, this democratic structure, we are going to lose it. You know, we are not immune from the larger forces of history. You know, empires fall, democracies end. We are not immune. And despite the American exceptionalism that is ingrained in every single one of us, it can happen here. It can happen here, and it is happening here. We are much further down the road than we ever dreamed we would be. And, you know, even if we elect Joe Biden, as I hope to God we will, we still have a tremendous amount of work to do. We still have a great deal of healing to do. I still believe we can do it. It's not too late, but we're getting there. We're getting there. Now is the time. Now is the time. Please do what you have to do.
Okay. Martin, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. Gracias. Thank you. Thank you. Merci for inspiring us, reminding us the power of poetry, and perhaps the impulse to act on some of the spirit that you've given us this afternoon. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you very much, Neal. And again, thanks to everyone involved in this process. And thank again my friend Wayne Carlin, and to everyone out there in the dark.